But anyways, I'll call the meeting to order and we'll get fired up here. Sorry to keep you waiting a bit, but anyhow, it's Friday, March 12th, and this is Committee on Agriculture, and we have Mr. Ellis and Mr. Lynn with us this morning. First thing to talk in regards to hemp, I believe. And so I think we'll run around the room and introduce ourselves. I'm Bobby Starr, and I chair the Committee of Ag.
Chris Pearson, Vice Chair and Senator from Chittenden County. And before I turn it over to Senator Polina, are either of you expecting a Kyle, somebody or other, to testify?
We are having Kyle Olson, the COO of the company, on standby if for technical questions if necessary.
Okay.
So Linda, we could let him in. Yeah. Morning, Kyle. Anthony.
I'm Anthony Polina. I represent Washington County.
Brian Collmore, Rutland County.
And Corey Parent, I represent Franklin County.
Yeah, and so I'd like to welcome the three of you folks in. Kevin is an old face to us, and so we've worked with him off and on over quite a few years. So Kevin, would you like to introduce your guest, and we'll get started?
Sure. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good to see you. Sorry it's under these circumstances. Always good to be in the company of my senator from Washington County, Senator Polina. Hey.
I'm here.
Good. Nice to see you. I'm just the introducer here, and then I'm going to get out of the way. But Pietro Lynn he's going to testify about the company that he represents in Williston and has a somewhat, I think, interesting challenge, and that we are looking for some guidance from the committee on. And it was my thought that this was the best place to come at the outset. So that's what we're doing. So with that, I'm just going to introduce Pietro Lynn. He's a Burlington attorney, and he's the expert on this issue. And Kyle Olson is standing by for sort of technical questions if you need to get deep into the rabbit hole of hemp / cannabis / everything else. So with that, I'll turn it over to Pietro. Thanks, Mr. Chairman. Good to see you.
Yeah.
Well, good morning to everybody, Mr. Chairman, senators. Thank you so much for allowing me to come and talk to you today about what I consider to be a perplexing legal issue. I am a lawyer, and I'm representing Vermont CBD Labs. Vermont CBD Labs is a company that's located in Williston, and it's in the business of drying and processing hemp into CBD oil, and then selling CBD oil either as distillate, which is the less purified form of it, or isolate, which is the more purified form of CBD. Unfortunately, in 2019, we saw a collapse of the CBD oil market, which of course had dramatic impact on hemp and the price of hemp, which means that Vermont farmers who are growing hemp have a difficulty selling it for a profitable sum on the open market. And as we sort of scratched our heads trying to figure out how we were going to make this business work, a process came to mind. And so that process I'll explain to you in a little greater detail in a moment. And if you want to go below my very superficial understanding of it, you're going to have to talk to Kyle about that. But the challenge here is this: we turn hemp included with cannabis into THC, that is Delta-9 THC, which, as you know, is the psychoactive ingredient in cannabis. The problem that exists for hemp farmers and hemp processors is that there's this gap in the statutes. On the one hand, we have the hemp statutes, which allow licensing for the cultivation and processing of hemp, but it has to be at THC levels that are below 0.3%. On the other hand, we have the statutes having to do with cannabis, which you all probably are intimately familiar with, which refer to the cannabis plants and talk about a cannabis license being necessary to turn cannabis or to process cannabis and to sell cannabis and all the other things that you have in mind for it, but excludes specifically hemp and those products that are subject to the hemp licenses. And so we've got this gap between the two, where if you're going to use CBD oil in connection with cannabis processing, you are potentially not covered by a license either as a cannabis licensee or a hemp licensee. And we're trying to find a way to fill that gap so that this work can be done in a way that is lawful and not subject to charges either criminally or civilly, or even fearfulness on the part of the people doing the work. And it's not going to take a big change in terms of the statutes that already exist, but there needs to be something that contemplates if somebody wants to use CBD oil in connection with cannabis processing, that their cannabis license will cover them for it. We're not suggesting hemp producers, where the standards are lower potentially to become a licensee, ought to be able to pursue and engage in that process. What we're saying is that we hope that we can find a way for the existing statute to be amended so that cannabis licensees who are processing cannabis can include hemp in the process where it is turned into THC. So that, I mean, it's not a complicated problem, but it's a problem that exists under the current statutes.
Bobby, you're muted.
Chris, you had a question?
Yeah. Thank you. First of all, have you talked to the ag agency, the folks that regulate hemp on this?
So let me defer that to Kevin, because I think he has spoken to those people.
Yeah, I spoke to them, and they acknowledged the gap. Corey acknowledged the gap and says we're going to have to deal with this down the line in some way. But I wanted to come to you first to get to a discussion going so that I could then take some more knowledge back to Corey and the secretary.
I think you mean Carrie.
Carrie, sorry.
So Pietro, it strikes me when I first heard about this, I thought to myself, okay, a cannabis processor making chocolates, the state's not going to care about the chocolate, right? We're not going to, I don't think we have set up a structure where the additional ingredients are regulated in that sense. Although I suppose if they're edible, then there's a food dynamic. But why isn't it just handled in that sense? I know we have a hemp processor license, and I think I just want to better understand it. So if I process hemp legally, and then somebody else is using the oils I create in their baked goods, does that baker also have to have a license, or where does the chain end in the legal setup now? Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, no. So that's a great question, and so let me answer it this way. If you're the baker and you're putting CBD oil in your brownies, that's not an issue. That's fine. The problem becomes when you process the CBD oil into something else, which in this case is Delta-9 THC, right? Because you are processing the hemp product. And that's where you can't do it with a hemp license, because you're creating something that exceeds the tolerances, the upper limits of THC, which is 0.3%. That's a problem. So you can't do it under your hemp license. And then the question becomes, can you, under your cannabis license, And the answer is also no, because you're engaged in the processing of hemp or a hemp product, which must be under the hemp license.
But it's not, but once you're over that limit, it's not a hemp product. By law, it's pushed into the other category, I thought.
Well, it is, but by virtue of using hemp or hemp products, in this case, CBD oil, in this manufacturing process where you're turning the hemp product into something else, right? Like you are processing the CBD oil into delta 9 THC along with the cannabis. But the problem is the cannabis statute says you can't do that. You can't process hemp or hemp products. That's something that has to be under the hemp license. But the hemp license says you can't turn it into this thing that exceeds the limits.
I hear what you're saying, but you seem to be focused on the process. And I guess what I'm saying is, if this is a need in the cannabis world, why don't they just accept this processed CBD and add it as if they were adding milk to their milk chocolate?
Because the statute specifically identifies hemp products, processing hemp products as something that must be done under the hemp license.
Are there any other products that you know of where they're related but they're different, so that they're regulated differently within the market? I thought about milk, but you may take, like Chris mentioned, chocolate, add it to it. You've got milk and then you have chocolate milk, but you don't alter, the butter fat, you don't alter the end product. What you want or what we're talking about doing is taking cannabis and adding some hemp to it to try to dilute it, to do something with, to use as a product. That's what you're talking about, right?
Well, Senator, not quite. Let me explain it a little better, and then I'm going to turn to my friend Kyle, who can explain it even better than me. Look, so there is a competitive advantage in using CBD oil to create THC, right? It's cheaper, it's more plentiful. We can do it at a lower price than using cannabis to create THC. And so where we use the CBD oil with the cannabis, we are able to convert the CBD oil into THC as an ingredient with the cannabis. So it's not like chocolate milk where we put the chocolate in and it's there and it stays chocolate. We are actually converting through the process the CBD oil into the THC. There's no more CBD oil left when the process is over. And Kyle, I'm going to turn to you because you, again, know this way better than me.
Sure. Well, first, thanks for having me this morning. It's a pleasure to get on here and talk to you guys about such a large topic that is very unique in its nature. So as Pietro has stated, we've worked for several years with some very, very high-class chemists that have come out of mostly the pharmaceutical space that have really helped us to get the science right. So the process is all about being able to take a CBD molecule and turn it into a THC molecule in a safe and efficient manner. So there are 12 states that currently allow CBD as an ingredient into THC products. And that's along the lines of what we're looking to do. But we're able to use a very highly skilled process that's, again, done in a very safe manner to take the CBD and close off a bond and turn it into a THC. And what we've found is that, like Pietro mentioned, we're able to bring the cost of goods down to increase access to patients and consumers alike, while also stimulating the industry from the farming aspect as well. So it's kind of a win-win on both sides, where we're able to get more product into the market and do it at a more affordable rate, while also giving a kickback and giving these hemp farmers an outlet to use their product in a very highly valued fashion.
So, so there are other states, I'll catch you, Brian, in a second. There are other states that have already done this, so we could talk with them and see what they did and how they did it, and do something here in Vermont that would be similar. Is that the idea behind moving this forward, or do we don't need to invent the wheel then?
You don't need to invent the wheel. And in fact, I think we've already shared with the Agriculture Department some of the legislation that exists in other states. So for example, Colorado and Michigan have addressed this issue. And in fact, we could easily address this issue in the current cannabis statute by just adding a comma and a half a sentence, right? I mean, the only issue here for us is if you're going to use CBD oil as an ingredient to create THC, then you're exempt from the hemp statute or the hemp licensing, but you must have the cannabis licensing. That for us, that can easily be done in our statute, and we can model it after the Michigan or the Colorado language, or we can come up with our own.
Yeah. Brian?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm getting the idea that I'm not understanding this. So let me just ask this question. Why can't someone have both licenses?
You can have both licenses. You can. There's nothing to stop you, but it still doesn't address the issue of the gap that exists, right? Because hemp license doesn't allow you to create THC. Cannabis license doesn't allow you to process hemp.
Okay.
So if you want to take a low grade like hemp product, buy hemp, you could process it in a certain way, according to Kyle, and you could make that into a more potent product that would have THC in it. So that's what we're attempting, that you're suggesting that we attempt to do.
That's right, Senator. And so the THC that's created, my understanding, and Kyle will tell me if I've got this wrong, is 80-90% purity. So it's a fairly potent liquid that can be used in edibles and the like.
Correct.
Yeah. Well, of course, this is the first that we've heard of it, other than when Kevin called us. The ag agency hasn't been knocking on our door asking us to do any of this. So this is our first trip around. What type of products would come out of if we allowed this? What would you get for products that we could get into the market with?
Kyle, why don't you explain what we have in mind?
So the product that's made out of this is going to be very similar to the product that's going to be made from traditional cannabis plants. It's all about being able to have a greater access to the supply to CBD. The CBD supply is very vast in this country right now, whereas the cannabis supply is very restrictive. So whereas a farmer could have 50 acres of hemp fairly easily, that's not the case on the cannabis side. So it's about getting these hemp farmers the ability to then have an access point to get rid of their material, and then we take that material and can put it right.
I think you got froze up, Kyle.
Well, so let me jump in where he jumped out and tell you what I understand that they, oh, Kyle, you're back. So I think the focus here, Kyle, was what are we going to make, what are we going to use this THC, Delta 9 THC for?
So, sorry, I guess my internet connection might be a little shaky, but the end product, you're looking at the identical, you put them side by side with traditional distillates and other plant oils. So you can use it for edibles. You can use it for topicals, all the exact same ways that you can use traditional oil, you can use this oil.
And where is this product processed at the present time? I mean, is it going to create any jobs so you can kind of lean on economic development? Is it only going to help the hemp growers try to get rid of their tons and tons of hemp? Is there going to be some manufacturing jobs or could there be created from allowing something like this to happen?
So let me jump in on that. What I expect is that so first of all, there will be an income stream for Vermont hemp farmers that far exceeds what they're getting now, which is nothing. Then there's going to be a need to store and dry the hemp. We need people to do that work. We will obviously process the hemp and the cannabis. Either if we have a license, we'll do it ourselves. If not, we'll get the technology to people who will, and that's going to require employees to do that work. It's going to be sold. We're going to need people to go out and sell it. There will be jobs, and it will create income streams, not just for the people doing this kind of work, that is the processing part, but essentially for the farmers who thought that hemp was going to be something that was a good source of income, and it turned out, instead of a dream, it turned out to be a nightmare. So our perception is that it's going to allow the hemp industry to become revived in Vermont. It's going to create jobs for those people who are engaged in this process, and it's going to be a source of income for Vermont retailers who sell this product.
Yeah. And what about, there's only 600,000 of us kicking around here in Vermont, but just a few hours away, there's millions of people. So are there any of these, a heck of a good market, I would presume. Are any of these other states that are close to us, are they doing anything with this, or is it just the western states?
Yeah. So there's nothing close by us, as I understand it. Nothing in Massachusetts, nothing in New Hampshire, New York, or Maine. But look, if we get to a place where federally we're able to ship THC across state lines, this is a patented technology, and we're going to be able to export from Vermont to the Northeast. And whatever jobs we get with our paltry 650,000 Vermonters, that's going to be exponentially increased by an ability to send it out to the rest of the Northeast.
Yeah. Questions from any of the committee members? To move forward on this, I think, I don't know if Kevin could get us that, but we ought to have a look at what Colorado and Michigan or a couple of these other states have done, what their law looks like. Review that and once we get by next week, we're gonna have some time to look at stuff. We have some House bills coming over, but I think we do know that we have a lot of hemp growers that have had serious problems selling their hemp, and that they need to have a market for that. And so I believe we would certainly have time to pursue this, in the future, this session. I don't know, where it will go, but I know judiciary, committee would want to look at it but, you gotta creep before you walk and so we gotta start somewhere. So, I think we could take some time and look into this after next week and move forward.
Mr. Chairman, I'd be glad to get you the statutes, and I just saw that Michelle came on. So if, with your permission, we'd be glad to share those statutes with her as well. Pietro, you'll see Michelle Childs, the committee counsel, down at the bottom of the screen there.
Hi, Michelle.
Yeah, she's the expert on cannabis and hemp and a lot of other issues. But good morning, Michelle. Good to see you. So are there any other questions for our witnesses at this point in time? Would you guys like us to work through Kevin, and if we have questions and need to talk with either of you to work through Kevin, or?
Yes, please. Yeah, Kevin would be terrific.
That'd be fine. I think the key conversation here would be between Michelle and Pietro, so lawyer to lawyer.
Yeah. Well, that
I would just point out that Michael O'Grady deals with the hemp statutes, I believe. So Michelle and he can work together, but I think we probably would be smart to start with him.
Okay.
Yeah. We should be able to get onto that, after we do crossover, and we'll, you get that stuff to us, Kevin, through Michael and Michelle, and we'll work on it.
That's great. Thank you.
Anything else from our guests? Any questions that you have of the committee, or any of the committee members have of our guests?
Not for me. Thank you so much for having me this morning. It was terrific to see you all. Some of you I follow on Twitter, and it's nice to see you in person. Yeah,
well, it saves you a trip to Montpelier and finding no parking spots. And no, this has worked pretty. It's worked pretty good as far as these kind of meetings go. We just miss at noon today, and normally I would bump into Senator Sears from Judiciary, and we talk a little bit about what we talked about here, and you miss all that inter-building conversation that really makes politics work. You don't do politics without chatting with people, and it's always good to look them eye to eye and not over a screen. And
Mr. Chairman, before we go, one thing I just want you to know that I did talk to Senator Sears, who advised us to come to you first. So that's what we did. And then,
thanks a lot. No, that's fine. And, we work well together, and, good guy to work with. So anyways, thanks a lot for being with us this morning, and hopefully we'll get an apple growing on the tree.
Thanks so much, folks. Bye.
Thank you.
See you later.
Yeah. Thanks, Kevin.
thank you. Thank you very much.
So, miscellaneous cannabis. We're gonna mix some hemp in with the cannabis, Michelle. We got to come up with a name for that stuff, though. You got one that you could call that product? hemp and cannabis mixed. You're muted.
That's probably better.
We received your draft that you did the night before last, I believe. But we're still having some committee discussions on where we should be going with this, I guess is the only way I can explain it. We have some mixed reactions on whether we should be doing this or if we should let the cannabis board deal with it. But it would be, I still think it would be good to put some parameters around what we expect them to do with it. And it's my thought that we should have some kind of a production control so that one group or one company can't, take over the market and crowd the little guys out somehow. I mean, we've witnessed that happening on our dairy farms and even some vegetable growers where you get a great big grower selling their product a lot cheaper than the little guy can sell theirs for. I would really like to have something in there to protect the small cultivators. I don't know if they've talked about that in any other committee or Chris.
There is a section in the current law of favoring small cultivators.
But how does it favor them?
I don't know if you have it, but I sent you the language earlier in the week for that. Let me see if I can find that email.
Yeah, you sent it to us on the 10th at 11:23. So do you want me to read it, Mr. Chair?
Sure.
Great.
So it's the intent of the General Assembly to move as much of the illegal cannabis market into the regulated market. It's also the intent to encourage participation in the regulated cannabis market by small local farmers. In furtherance of these goals, the board shall consider policies to promote small cultivators as defined in section blah, blah, blah. The application for small cultivator licenses shall be prioritized over larger cultivation licenses during the initial application period. In accordance with subdivision blah, 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 the board shall consider the different needs and risks of small cultivators when adopting rules and shall make an exception or accommodation for such rules for cultivators of this size where appropriate, provided the rules shall not provide for an exception or accommodation to the requirements of section 869 of this title. Upon licensing, a small cultivator may sell cannabis to a licensed dispensary at any time for sale to patients and caregivers pursuant to the dispensary license. So we sort of tee them up a little bit earlier. We give them lighter regulations and we give them access to the dispensaries. Do the larger facility grows get to sell to the dispensaries? How does that work, Michelle?
Yes.
Yeah. Coming online later.
Yes. And so that was the idea, is that they once is that there's as soon as the small cultivators come out several months earlier, that they can start selling their product and don't have to wait till the retailers come online in the fall.
So I don't know, how do you regulate? So the little guys get started, they get a little market going. But then the big guys are allowed to come online, a few months later. How do we protect the little guys keeping that market and not the big guy coming in and going to their market, going to the processor and saying, hey, I can sell you this stuff for X number, instead of $800 a pound, $700 a pound or whatever. So there's no protection in there for that though, is there?
No, I think that's all part of the board's calculations, and when they're establishing the tiering and licensing, they will establish caps for how large those cultivator licenses are. And as I think I had testified before, is when you have had those limits, there are either unlimited smaller licenses and then restrictions on the number of ones that you go up and as they get larger. The issue I would just raise, and I don't know if y'all talked about it yesterday when I wasn't there, but is that if you can certainly establish a cap like you did in this last draft with the 30,000, but I think you just want to keep in mind that board has to, so the board only operates, and the whole program only operates off of fees. None of the tax revenue goes to supporting the regulatory system that's designated elsewhere. And so, and the board is required to set the, to recommend the fees, and the fees have to cover the cost of all of the regulation. So licensees are going to be carrying the cost of running the program. So I would just caution you just want to make sure you think about the fact that if you establish a certain square footage cap in here now without kind of the information that hopefully the board will have in terms of how much product do you need, how do we divvy that up among how many how much square footage, and then how do we divide that square footage into the various tiers and the licenses and things like that. If you cap that, and I don't know obviously what the right number is there, is you can't, the larger operations are going to have a much higher fee, and they're going to subsidize
The little
cultivators. And so I would just caution you, that I get completely, and I think your sentiment is shared by just about the whole General Assembly that's been working on this, is a preference for smaller cultivators. But, if you take the larger players out, you may be unintentionally having to raise the costs on the smaller cultivators, because you got to have, the fees have to cover the program, and the program is running at a deficit absolutely for at least 2 years. But it's, so there's a fallback where you can use after a couple years some you can backfill the fund with some of the tax revenue. But as you can imagine, the Appropriations Committee really didn't want to do that, and the Finance and Ways and Means committees were like, the fees have to cover the program. And so I guess I just caution you about picking a number right now without having all of the data, being able to determine, how much product and things like that is. You don't want to put it in a situation where then, the small cultivator fees are higher than most people can pay.
So I was joking when I said you were the expert on cannabis, but really there probably isn't anyone that knows any more about it than you do in the legislature. I think you just made a good point. I think Chris maybe raised that point a day or two ago in the discussion about if we don't have these big guys around, it'll crowd our little guys out because they wouldn't be able to afford to pay the fees to keep everything going. So I don't know where the heck we are with this, and I don't fully understand why Senator Sears sent it down to us, but it's almost beginning to sound to me like we should send him a nice letter wishing him well and good luck, and we think that the way the committee has crafted the bill at this point in time might be the best that can be done without having all these facts and figures. You could really get into a bind. What do you?
It is really complicated, especially if what you guys were talking about is the indoor and the outdoor, and what should the ratio be, and all of that kind of stuff. And just so I'm in Senate Judiciary next on this bill, so I won't have time to write a letter between when I leave you and I switch my Zoom screen, but I could share with them.
Well, if you walked all the way to Bennington instead of driving. But
I think they're, it wasn't that they had specific concerns necessarily that they needed you to figure out. It's just that the witnesses had come to them with a lot of proposed changes to existing law around the ag stuff, and they didn't feel as though they could really tackle it because it's not their expertise. So I don't think he's going to be upset with you, I guess. That's what I'm saying.
What do you other committee members think? But I think that's where we are with this, personally. But what do you guys think? Brian?
Yeah, I was ready to at least consider the indoor and outdoor 4-to-1 ratio, I guess, at one point. But I know you like to use analogies, Mr. Chair, so I'll just say, if this were a horse and had saddlebags on its back, and we continue to fill the saddlebags up, at some point the horse won't be able to move if it gets too heavy. So maybe we're better off just lightening the saddlebag and letting Judiciary know that, and letting the CCB go forward with their work.
Any other thoughts, Chris?
Well, Anthony looked like he was about to say something.
Well, I was just going to say that I'm a little disappointed that we couldn't do more, but I kind of understand why people feel we can't. I mean, I think that I would like us to be able to propose the limits, the supply management type idea with limits on the sizes. I really would like to do that. But if the committee doesn't feel comfortable with it, I do understand why people feel hesitant to do that. But I would be disappointed that we don't. I'm not going to be disappointed in the sense that I'm going to storm out of the room, that kind of a thing. But I just wish we could do it. We could do it.
Have they talked, Michelle, in Judiciary or any other committee in regards to some type of a supply control? I think you mentioned even earlier today, something about the board is gonna look over and figure out like how many pounds the market will bear, and then figure out who's going to get to grow it. Did you mention something like that earlier today?
Well, I think that's what's contemplated in the existing law. And if you look back again, like on the process that we've taken previously and how other states do it, is they do a market analysis, they figure out, what kind of supply should there be, and then they start to divvy that up, and according to, market share and how many licenses, and do they put caps on licenses? Do they do unlimited for smaller, but maybe only have, at the top tier, maybe only 3 or something like that. But then but it's up to the board to really be digging into all those details with the data that they're able to pull together. And, and they would consult with other states that have done it and look at their formulas and how they've determined that stuff, work with a numbers person, and then they're going to propose all of that. And, they're going to have to propose fees to you. And so they have to figure out the tiers pretty darn fast. And then because they can't recommend fees to you until they figure out the tiering. And so that's going to be one of the very first things that they do is figure out, how much cannabis, is going to be bought in Vermont, and how do we divvy that up fairly? And then before they've adopted the tiers or through rule or anything like that, they're going to report back to you on the fees, and you're going to see what they're proposing as tiers, because you're going to have to figure out whether or not those fees are appropriate for those tiers. And so that's your opportunity to chime in and say, we think these tiers there's way too many big guys here. Or maybe you're like, well, maybe we don't want 5 big guys, but they got to pay $100,000 a piece for a license. And that means that the little guys get a really much reduced license application fee. So that's all going to be, but that's going to come back before you.
So that'll be back. So if we wanted to put in something that if the market increases or the sales increase by 10% or 20%, that a certain percentage of that should have to go to the small cultivators or tier 1 versus so much of a percentage should go to tier 3 or something like that. But
Sure.
we will have that to deal with later. And
Yeah, I mean, I don't know how it's going to really work, but because the board was supposed to be seated in January, they were supposed to report to you on April 1st on the fees. So we're kind of trying to figure out how that works now. But yes, it's coming back to you. And then also remember, you have a whole nother year. Again, we don't have a board yet. There's not going to be any licenses issued until next year. So then you're not going to have any real sales, happening until maybe the end of FY22, but most likely you're looking at FY23, and you can kind of see what the sales are, and you guys can always, pass legislation. I'm sure there's going to be cannabis legislation every year from here on out. And so, you have the opportunity to say, oh, if the market's much bigger than we thought, let's put this in there and say, as the market increases, you have to dedicate a certain amount towards the smaller tiers. You can totally do that, but I would say wait until you start to see what it looks like. I think you'll have more information and be able to be more targeted in what you want to say.
Yeah, I think Chris had a question, then Brian a question, and Corey, you're going to have to ask yours next week.
Fine.
Well, I just wanted to point out your concern, Mr. Chair, and the parallel to dairy. There's 2 things. Michelle, the board is charged. There's not likely to be an explosion of cannabis because the board is charged with trying to hit the level right, because we don't want to see it get diverted, right? So there's an inherent protection, at least in concept. Also, this is all grown, processed, and utilized and sold anyway in state.
Yes.
So whatever happens in Wisconsin has no bearing on us because it's an in-state entity and because of the federal universe. So it is distinctly different from dairy, where the national prices, it's just totally different. And the runaway fear, and I think we all share this idea that the big guys are getting way big and stomp everybody out. But the board, that would be a total violation of their charge if they allow that to happen. The other thing I'll just add is, if you look at Massachusetts, you look in Maine, it's not like next July, boom, this is just exists, right? And you've got 80 facilities around the state. This will roll out. In Massachusetts, it took them many years before they had, I think, more than a half dozen stores. So it's going to evolve, and I kind of am coming to this idea that we just leave it as it is, because we're going to get to see it and monitor it and say, no, we're worried. You've got enough big people, no more licenses there. I think we're just going to get that interplay. So that's where I'm leaning at this moment.
Yeah, Brian?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So based on what Michelle told us a couple minutes ago, and Anthony, I do appreciate what you're saying. I was hopeful we could at least, be somewhat responsive to the folks that we heard from the last few days. But if we pick the wrong number and put it in statute, and when I say wrong number, I mean, at some point, someone's going to have to figure out how much should be grown, what the price is going to be, what the license fees are going to be, and how that all interplays, together. And if we put in statute the wrong numbers, we're just going to have to come back and fix it anyway. So I think we're better off just being silent on it right now and letting people that we've put in charge of doing this work do the work.
I would also just mention, and certainly all know this as ag committee members know this better than I do around pricing and the market and stuff like that. But, there's been a lot of experimentation in the states that went first, and especially on the West Coast, about trying to find, there's a real, it's kind of throwing a dart at the map, but also just trying to figure out what's the right amount of supply, because you want to have enough out there that you're undercutting the illegal market, right? So that you're trying to so that you compete with the illegal market, but you don't want to glut, which like what happened in Oregon, where they've got so much that they don't know what to do with it, right? And they've passed legislation saying as soon as the feds change the law, we're immediately starting to export cannabis. And so they passed legislation because they don't know what to do with all the stockpiles of cannabis that's out there. And so, and again, it's just such a technical thing that you have to really get into, and you could do that through the legislative process, but it obviously is very timely and or very it takes a lot of time. And so the board has to kind of figure that out.
Yeah, Corey, I believe you had a question, or?
Yeah, I won't say much. I agree with Senator Pearson and Colmore. I just think we don't have the data and the information we need to really jump into the pool on this one. So I think, unfortunately, we just got to give it some time and let it develop a little bit further before we step in.
Well, so Michelle, do you want to pass our feeling on to Senator Sears and the Judiciary Committee that we feel they're doing a great job, and there isn't any way that we feel at this point in time we can improve their bill, and that we feel, that we need more time to let the board work out these numbers before we make a hard decision on a supply control or any of the other stuff.
I'm happy to do that. And I'll let them know how hard you worked this week, fitting it in and taking testimony, and spent some considerable committee time on it. I did have one question, which is, yesterday, did you talk about that one section in S25 is introduced with regard to the 25% of sales by integrated licensees coming from small cultivators?
I don't know. We may have very early on, but I don't know if we didn't have any major discussion to reach a resolve on that. Is that something they thought they'd like to put in?
Well, that they have that in the bill as introduced, and I'll just describe it a little bit. It's not complicated, and Senate Gov Ops made a recommendation on it as well. Is because the integrated licensees go a few months earlier than the retailers, And remember, the small cultivators, testing labs, and integrated licensees are licensed first. There's a requirement that during part of that interim period where the integrated is selling to the public, but the retailers haven't come online, there's a requirement in the bill that at least 25% of the cannabis flower sold by an integrated licensee is to be obtained from small cultivators. So that's again one of the kind of things trying to help give a leg up to the small cultivators. The witnesses that you have had in this week, they testified in Senate Gov Ops that, or Jeff did, that he thought that a lot of his folks would not sell to an integrated licensee or a dispensary. And so it raises the issue of, well, what if there's not enough product? And so Senate Gov Ops made the recommendation that it just says, the integrated licensees during that interim period have to 25% has to come from small if available. So just kind of clarifying that if there's just not enough product out there that's been produced and then tested for them to buy, that they're obviously, if you can't do it, you can't do it.
Yeah. Should we hear from Brian and Anthony there? They heard the testimony in government ops. Do you recall that issue?
I do. We talked about a lot of different things in GovOps. I'm not remembering exactly. I'm sure Michelle's correct. Anthony, do you recall?
No, not quite honestly, I don't remember anything coming of it.
The suggestion was just to say if available.
Right.
Press?
Well, so the current law is silent but permissive, right? It
Yeah.
doesn't.
Yeah, they are allowed to sell to each other. Yep.
But it seems like there's a strange juxtaposition here. If they're saying they won't sell, and then they're saying the law should mandate that they have to buy, that if the growers are mad at the dispensaries and aren't going to sell there, I'm not sure what a mandate on the dispensaries that they have to buy if available does for us. But in other jurisdictions, I mean, I just remember the headlines out of Quebec was really startling. Friend was headed up there, and the dispensaries were closed, and it turns out they shut them down from 7 days a week to just the weekends because they were running out of product. So if anything, I mean, my assumption is that we risk running out and not having enough right out of the gate. Is there anything that allows the dispensaries to triple and quadruple production ahead of time? What's their timeline?
Yep. So there in Act 164, there's a provision that lifts the caps. So for dispensaries currently, as I talked about earlier, is they have production caps that's tied to their per patient registration. So they're allowed to have 2 mature plants for every patient that's registered with each dispensary. And those caps are lifted shortly before the integrated licenses take effect, so that the dispensaries can sell or transfer to integrated licensees to have product earlier. Again, trying to get some revenue coming in. So that there is that thing. So they will have product, but it was trying to get some of the smaller cultivators in there. I haven't looked into the issue, but O'Grady did mention to me the issue of set-asides being a little questionable, and I haven't worked enough with stuff like that in the business realm. I'm over down the hall usually making up crime, so but there, but I know that the discussion around some of the set-asides was around race-based set-asides or things like that. So but I don't know, but I do just kind of raise that as whether or not I don't know if there's any concern about particular set-asides.
Well, we haven't had much discussion on that. Has judiciary talked about putting that in, or do you know, Michelle?
It was in the bill as introduced. I don't know that there's necessarily, especially hearing from the Growers Association, it didn't sound as though they were, I don't know, necessarily advocating for it or something. I don't know, but not that the Growers Association represents all the people who will be growing in the market. But
Well,
you don't have to come up with anything. It's fine. I'm happy to just talk to them about it. And
well, personally, I just as soon leave the 25% in to come from the small growers. If Ben and Jerry's had to buy 25% of their product from small farmers, we probably would have more farmers around Vermont than we have today. So, I mean, I'd let them run with it, and the board can deal with it and come back to us. And once we see numbers and how everything's going, we might be able to make a better decision. But I just soon see the smaller producers be allowed to sell at least, or the stores would have to buy 25% from the smaller producers.
is it are you okay with the recommendation from Senate Gov Ops to add if available?
Yeah.
So if there isn't.
Yeah, if it's not available, I mean, sure.
Okay.
And Michelle, is the concept here in the some initial phase, or does this extend over?
It's just during the initial phase. It's just before kind of the whole thing really starts picking up in the fall. It's something to say that, you're trying to get the integrated out of the gate early so that you can get some revenue in and get the system rolling, and also give small cultivators a place to sell their product, because they can't sell it to the public yet. So you want to give them a market to sell to. And so that's what it's for.
We're talking only about legal cultivators, right?
Of course, this is all only to do with legal cultivating. It is still, you can grow yourself, but it is illegal to sell anything without a license.
No, I'm just kidding.
It's amazing how much of the distinction gets lost sometimes, and not by you, but by some of the discussions.
Thanks a lot for being with us, Michelle.
It's a pleasure.
And we always have a good time in ag. Never too many dull moments. But if you'd pass that on to Senator Sears and the other and his committee members, we'd appreciate that.
Sure, no problem.
Yeah.
Right. Thanks a lot.
Thank you. Yeah. So we have Mr. Carpenter with us. How are you, Brian? He disappeared.
Gotta remember to unmute myself. I'm doing well today. Thank you very much.
Yeah. Do any of the committee members need to take a look, any break or a couple of minutes or anything? You're all set?
Either way.
5 minutes.
Either way.
Yeah. Well, we don't want to keep Brian tied up. So welcome, Brian. We know each other fairly well. Chris, you want to introduce yourself and we'll roll right through?
How do you do, Brian? Chris Pearson from Chittenden County.
Hi, Brian. Anthony Polina, Washington County.
Brian Collmore from Rutland County.
Corey Parent from Franklin County. Good to see you again, Brian.
Same.
Yeah, and it's good to have you with us, Brian. And we have S67. It's an act relating to creating a right to repair agricultural equipment. We had a hearing yesterday that, was an hour and a half long, had the guy in from the John Deere dealerships, and we had a couple of farm people in that own large equipment, and have had, I would say, a nightmare with their equipment from time to time, getting somebody to come and fix it, and then also the charges for fixing it, service calls and plug-in charges and a host of other things. So we certainly know that you run, I believe, four large dealerships. You have one right here in Derby where I live. And so we wanted to be sure and, hear your take on this and what's involved, and go from there. So welcome. And, if you've got questions for us or a presentation, however you want to lead off.
Okay. Well, Chairperson Starr, Vice Chair Pearson, and honorable members of the Senate Ag Committee, I want to thank you for allowing me the opportunity to speak to you today. I'm Brian Carpenter. I actually know most of you by following the Senate Ag Committee. You guys are near and dear to our industry, and so you're familiar to me, but I'm probably not familiar to you, or at least many of you. Just as a matter of introduction, I'm the principal owner of Champlain Valley Equipment. It's a farm equipment dealership. We also sell light construction and utility equipment. And we have stores in Middlebury, St. Albans, Derby, and Berlin. We employ 100 people plus or minus. In the summer, it might swell to 110 with some part-time employees, but full-time employees about 100. We represent multiple manufacturers of equipment covering both what would be considered mainline major manufacturers and short line suppliers to provide the specialty equipment that's needed for many of our smaller growers. Our business was founded in 1970 by my father. We are proud to service and support much of Vermont, but we also do some business in New York and New Hampshire. In 2020, CVE paid out over $5.3 million in wages to our employees. We remitted over $1.3 million in sales taxes to the state of Vermont, and $166,000 in personal Vermont income tax withholdings to the state of Vermont. So I would consider us a medium-sized business, and certainly we've been around 50 years and have seen the ups and downs. Our single largest industry that we support is the Vermont farm industry. And so, as I said, you guys are near and dear. Just as a matter of introduction, also, I spend a lot of time with our farmers, and especially the dairy farmers, and I'm serving on the Vermont Dairy Producers Alliance, and they asked me to be the chair of that. And while I grew up on a dairy farm, I'm not currently a dairy farmer. We have beef and chickens and small hobby farm. But as our business grew, it just wasn't enough time to farm as well. But I'm very familiar with farming. I work in the farm industry as partners with all of our farmers on a very routine basis, and put a lot of time forward, ensuring that that the farm economy is getting a fair shake and good representation. I'm also the chair of the Middlebury Select Board. I've been the chair since 2016, so certainly understand governance and the desire to represent your constituency and to make changes that are substantive and move us forward. Up front, I will tell you, I don't think this bill does that. I think the real drive is really focused on consumer electronics, and the right to repair is driven by that desire to have us be able to repair those things that we're buying. In the industry, the farm equipment dealers have the ability to sell almost everything to the farmer that he needs to be self-sufficient. When it comes down to the laptop, I did watch your testimony that you took over the last couple or well, Tuesday, I think, and Thursday. And what was interesting is the two testimonials that you received. Neither one of them would be any better off by this particular bill, because they're not doing a lot of the repairs. Well, one of the operators is not doing the repairs that everything is available for currently. And the other one's challenge is really availability because of using some older equipment that is no longer produced. I did some Google searches. So let me just, if I could, I made a bunch of notes just to try to share with you my thoughts. I've played in this. I've been working with this issue for a long time. But again, another area that I was the chair of the National Dealer Association in 2016 to 2017, as this was becoming a large issue. I had served on the board for 10 years. And as we looked at it, it became very clear that one of the biggest challenges was with the modern equipment. A farmer who's out in the field and in the process of harvesting and gets an error code and not knowing whether that's a significant error code or just a nuisance code. And so it made all the sense in the world to be able to provide them more data so they can make really sound decisions on whether to continue running and harvesting, or if they need to call the dealer at that time. And so in 2018, in agreement, the Association of Equipment Manufacturers and the Equipment Dealers Association, in discussions with a lot of the lobbyists for this particular legislation, which was at the time just a general right to repair, agreed to provide to the consumer, our producers, a tool that would allow them to plug in and read all those codes and diagnose and do a lot of their own repairs. So as of the beginning of 2021, John Deere has fulfilled that commitment. Case has fulfilled that commitment. New Holland has fulfilled that commitment. Kubota is in the process of final testing on that tool. And AGCO has a tool available for their newer models. And so currently, as it stands, almost every one of the what we would consider the major manufacturers in the farm equipment industry are providing to the end user everything that they need to be able to do a significant portion of their own repairs.
Could you explain that a little deeper, Brian? You know, what is it that do they supply it if the customer wants to buy it? Do they supply it as part of the cost of the machine that they're purchasing?
Yep.
Could you explain to us a little bit of how that all works?
Absolutely. So there is a cost for the tool. And it depends upon the particular manufacturer, what the cost for that tool is. For instance, with Case in New Holland, once you buy the tool, if you just have one tractor and you want to buy a subscription for that one tractor, I think it's in the neighborhood of $900 to $1,000 a year for the subscription for that one piece of equipment. Maybe I can walk you through some more, Senator Starr, because I'm not sure that that's the only thing that's germane to this conversation. It's really quite a complex issue when you look at it on the agricultural side.
Yeah, no, continue, Brian. I just didn't want to lose the answer to that question.
Yeah, understand. So over the years, I've witnessed a significant change to the agricultural business, the agricultural equipment marketplace. I took over our dealership in January of 1993. Back then, we didn't know what a computer was, and you didn't have, we barely had email. It was dial-up email. I had to kind of chuckle to myself in the testimony by the U.S. PERG representative that the idea that manufacturers are doing this to build in obsolescence into their equipment. And I would argue that there's nothing further from the truth, that manufacturers are doing this to add a lot of functionality that the consumer is demanding, but also that they have done it to improve the productivity and what was necessary to meet a lot of the regulatory driven guidance that was coming down from the feds. The technology and innovation has enabled today's producers to accomplish in one day what might have taken several days or a week back in 1970. For example, a Krone Big M, which is a big mower with a 32-foot cut, can cut, crimp, and windrow a hayfield at the rate of 20 plus acres per hour. In my youth in 1970, it would take us a full day to mow a 20-acre field. And we'd think we had a heck of a day work done. Like many other industries, consolidation is being driven by the cost increases. That Big M mower that I just referred to sells for $350,000 to $400,000, whereas the popular mower of 20 years ago was approximately $30,000. The margin reductions that we're seeing in not just the farm business, but certainly farm equipment business. When I took over our business here in Middlebury, we were a one-store business. There were 7 competitors, all locally owned family businesses. And we are the last family-owned business. Just it was announced that the John Deere dealership will be sold out to United Ag and Turf, and as of 1 April, the one that's here in Middlebury. So one of the largest ag markets in the state, and there's only one family-owned business left. It's just the dynamics of how difficult this business is to paint the farm equipment dealer as a giant who's got the farmer at his whim is just not the case. With modern communications, the ability to search on the internet, and frankly, the size of the dealers outside of our state. There's many dealers outside of our state that are playing within the state that either have on-the-road service trucks or actual small outlet facilities here in the state. So it's just that the particular market we're talking about has changed. The right to repair it's got really, if you look, you could look at it, I think, from really three seats. There's the consumer who pays money for a product and wants the total access to that product. And I get that. On another, you have the manufacturer who invests capital to innovate and build product and wants to have some control for several reasons, not the least of which is safety and regulatory compliance. Then there's the dealer who has a relationship with each and has to provide a value where the customers will go elsewhere. And then we also have external factors, the largest of which has been legislation. That's emissions legislation, clean water, right to repair. There's all different factors that are playing in here. So if we look at it from the manufacturer's standpoint, a manufacturer invests significant money and time into research and development to improve the technologies. Precision farming has been consumer driven. Emissions and engine technologies have been regulatory driven. One of the challenges that we had was how fast that ramped up. We went from tier 3 to tier 4A into tier 4 final in a relatively short order. And when you look at it from a manufacturer standpoint, their ability to ensure quality control, to be able to try to utilize as much of commonality on parts, all this type of stuff, it just was thrown to the wind. And so some of the what I would say, I guess I would say the frustration is shared by all, not just the consumer, it's also shared by the dealers and the manufacturers, because we had have so many different changes over a very short period of time to meet emission standards that the amount of parts that we have to carry, and we may not sell that many of in a year, we might sell it once or twice in a year. The manufacturer and as they had to bring new technologies before they were fully vetted, the amount of money they had to spend on going out and doing product improvements and make sure that they had those products working. And then certainly the consumer on the end of having to deal with the challenges of those hiccups along the way. But I would say that the costs, other than downtime, were largely borne by the manufacturer in bringing those products to market. Then when we think of the manufacturer, the customer talks, they all survey their end users, and they got the word that customers wanted simpler. They just longed for, I think I saw your testimony, your discussion, Senator Starr, with how much you like the older trucks, and Senator Colmar about the old motorcycles. We all want the old cars where you could tune them by your ear. I mean, I enjoyed working on equipment, and frankly, the manufacturers have worked hard to bring equipment as an option that is simpler and less computerized. You can get up into the little over 100 horsepower tractor. John Deere has the E series. New Holland and Case both have a more stripped down, simpler series. For the farmer who wants to do most of their own repairs, there's product now available that allows them to buy products that are simpler and don't need to have a computer plugged in. And for the larger equipment, if a customer wants to do a lot of their own, that repair manual that has been available forever for a customer to buy, they can look at the onboard screen. I think there was some discussion about being able to plug in a car. And we don't even need to buy a tool to plug in, because the onboard screen, you can look at those error codes. And if you have the repair manual and it walks you through all the different, what those error codes mean. And sometimes it's a matter of just resetting them on that panel and not needing to plug in a computer. It's actually, we probably have to plug in a computer into our Bobcat construction more often than we do into our agricultural equipment, because that's required to be able to pull the script as to what the issue is. Whereas on most of our large ag equipment, there's a large onboard computer that you can just walk through it with the proper manuals. So, manufacturers just aren't building the obsolescence, and obsolescence comes for the most part when you think of the farm equipment industry. We still have tractors from the 40s that we're servicing, and we still can get the parts for those through the OEM, and it's amazing given how few there are. The comparison to the auto or over-the-road truck. I just kind of took a quick look. In 2020, 14,471,000 cars and light trucks were sold, and approximately 276 million total vehicles were registered. That's in contrast to farm tractors. 244,637 farm tractors were sold in 2020, 2/3 of which were under 40 horsepower, which is, it's just not even a comparable industry. And when you look at, we have the same amount of R&D and the same costs, and yet we can only, a manufacturer can only sell so many. There has to be at least some recognition for that investment and their desire to retain the control over those technologies that they've invested a tremendous amount of money into. One of the last things that we talked about and that they harp on is the safety aspect. And part of the reason why they're so concerned about the safety aspect is really the legal until we solve tort reform and fix some of those issues, there's no doubt that the manufacturer will be named, as well as the dealers, every time that there's an incident that involves one of these pieces of equipment. The dealer has to have liability insurance. We carry large insurance policies. We have to send our techs and become certified. The average tech is in school 2 weeks out of the year. And so a lot of the individuals that we would be giving this technology to overwrite a safety mechanism on the tractor, there is no system like in the auto industry to ensure that there's a liability insurance. Farm equipment is not registered. Every time that you go in to get your car inspected and they look at the registration, they know they check to verify that you have insurance on it. And we have to have an insurance card when we get our car inspected. And I'm seeing Senator Pearson shaking your head. Is that not true?
It just changed recently. I was surprised when I inspected my car, but
serious.
Your point is valid. You are mandated to have insurance, but it's no longer checked. But
interesting.
Your point holds.
And when you look at the risks, next to, as I understand it, I think we're certainly cognizant of safety. It's a big thing in the farm industry. Next to fishing, I believe farming is one of the next most dangerous professions that's out there. So that's kind of from the manufacturer's standpoint as I see it. From a dealer's standpoint, we invest significant money into the support of our customers. I put a lot of time into working with each of our customers. The challenges are substantial. There's the cost of tooling, the cost of training, certification, road surface, rentals, loaners that oftentimes, especially if something's under warranty, we might put out for free. Our monthly access fees. These things all are really required in order to be a professional repair facility and to do what is expected from both the manufacturer and the customer. When they come to our business, they don't want us taking any shortcuts on that. And last year, another expense I took a quick look at. Last year, we wrote off over $450,000 in unrecoverable warranty repairs. It's one of the biggest reasons for that is diagnostic time, and we're not paid for our diagnostic time on the farm equipment in the warranty agreement, and that's the biggest challenge in repairing modern equipment is diagnosing. We fully get the frustration of customers when it takes some time, but giving them that tool is not going to make them efficient at it. As a kind of an example, in our area, there may be one of a particular model. It's just we have 30. I think we're down to maybe 30 large dairies in the state of Vermont, and there's certainly quite a few mid-sized dairies, but it's not that many. And if they're all used, everybody has a different brand they want, or maybe a different size. And so to be an expert on any one particular product, it takes a lot of investment, a lot of time. And so I can give you an example of a customer that we had an issue with his piece of equipment last year. Could not figure out what the issue was. It was throwing a lot of different codes. And we thought that it might be wiring, and we traced all the wiring. As I think the John Deere representative yesterday talked about the amount of miles of wiring on equipment now, and doing continuity tests and check in for if there was a wire that was maybe partially pulled apart or started to chafe. And in the end, it was a mechanical issue that was deep in the transmission. The amount of labor that was involved in the diagnostics was significant. And the manufacturer paid for part of that, and we paid for part of it, and the customer paid for part of it. We all agreed to pay for a third of that. And you just wouldn't get that if you don't have the dealer relationship with the customer and the dealer relationship with the manufacturer. And so I'm worried about what I feel is unnecessarily moving into that relationship. The Farm Bureau is a sponsor of this through US PERG, and that's on the national. The Vermont Farm Bureau has asked its members if there was an issue, And as far as I last heard from Jackie Folsom, not a single farmer replied that this was an issue here in Vermont. When we look at it from the farm standpoint, our farmers are so challenged to get everything done that they need to between land management, their if it's a dairy farm, their herd management, the amount of different balls that they have in the air. They really want to be able to have the infrastructure that we are blessed to have here in Vermont to be able to fall back on so that to take care of their equipment. There's many of our farms that have an on-the-farm shop that they do a big chunk of their routine maintenance, their preventive maintenance level services, and smaller repairs. And that works for them. But especially with the challenge to get technicians, I mean, it's not much different than plumbers and electricians. All of the high-end trades are short. And so you'll find very few that, when I talked about 7 farm equipment dealers in Addison County, there was also a lot of independent techs, independent repair shops back then. And now, we have a relationship with almost all of them. We sell them parts at a discount so that they can resell them and still at a fair price and still make a profit. Very similar to what a contractor would do with a lumber trades business. And yet we only have a couple of them left here. This change is not going to bring that back. It's a long-term trend that has occurred. When you look at our particular market, we've had a significant reduction in farms. Farming has been very challenging, especially our dairies has been very challenging. It's cyclic. So there may be times when it's really good, but there's times when the farmer may need some time to pay, and these small independent repair shops have a very difficult time carrying those receivables. They also, there's a lot of things that it basically stops in Vermont in December, January, February, March. And so trying to cash flow during those slow months. It's the dealer side and the independent repair shop side. There's a reason why the dealers have had to get bigger, and there's a reason why many of our independent repair shops have gone by the wayside. Also, a thought is that selling directly to independent repair facilities would then have a significant impact on the market, because right now when they're doing repairs, they come to us, and that gives us, as the manufacturer's rep in the area, we're professional parts managers, I guess I would say, and based upon the amount of parts that sell into our region, into our territory, we stock those parts at one of our stores, or sometimes all of the stores. And we can then have access if a customer's down, and it's a part that we might not sell that many of, and it may be only at one store. We may have to drive, but you can drive to one of our stores in Vermont, as opposed to waiting for something to come out of Texas or wherever the part is warehoused at. And so it's a significant advantage to have a strong dealer network, and having all those parts come through the dealer is a very important aspect of that. Whereas the dealer wouldn't have that same same sense of, if they don't see all of the parts that are coming into their territory, they may not stock as many parts. I looked at there was a question about parts and service profitability, and I looked at ours, and I know ours is quite typical of a dealer. Our gross sales volume, 70% of that is sales, but only a third of the gross margin dollars. So we couldn't live on sales alone. And there's no doubt that parts and service is a profit center. It's funny because when I first got into the business, the farm equipment dealers weren't as professionalized 20 years ago, 25 years ago. And there's many of them that considered their service department as a necessary evil to sell the equipment. And you might read articles about that. It was actually always surprised me that they saw it as that. But that was kind of the old school. And part of the reason why they said that is because of the expenses to provide that service. There's the facilities costs. If you don't have to provide the service, if you want to outsource that, you really can drop the cost of having a dealership, because the majority of your facility is your service department. You have the tooling. The tooling costs is unbelievable. Sometimes you might sell a piece of equipment only a couple times a year, but you've got to have all those special tools for that piece of equipment if you're going to sell it. The on-the-road vehicles. Senator Starr is well aware how much new trucks cost, and we have on-the-road service at every one of our stores, and not just one. The Middlebury store that I'm sitting at has 5 on-the-road vehicles that we can bring service right out to the customer in the field. And then, as I said earlier, the 2 weeks of training for each tech each year, that's 2 weeks that you can't bill them out. Then you take a month's vacation, that's 6 weeks you can't bill them out. Holidays, 7 holidays out of there. The thought that our top rate is $120. That's our top rate. I think we pay $120 an hour for a guy to come in here with a briefcase and fix our copier. So I don't feel like $120 an hour in our current environment with all of the expense is unjust. I think it's a fair rate. So service is 10% of only 10% of your gross margin dollars. And then once you take all of those expenses that are on the expense side of your P&L, it's not it is a profit center, but it's not price gouging. It's treating the consumer fairly. And I think that those who don't want to use that service, they have plenty of options given the environment that we have created through this negotiation with the manufacturers and all the dealers to agree to provide everything less that final ability to overwrite and shut off components within the piece of equipment. And then when we go back to selling parts direct, parts is 20% of the average dealer's revenue, and that's the other third of your gross margin. It's very capital intensive. We will at any time have over $3 million in parts between the 4 stores. And so that's money that's sitting there on the shelf, and we have to be able to get a return on that investment. And so to get in between our relationship with the manufacturer and our relationship with those customers has a pretty significant effect on our commerce in our business models. So while I am very supportive of the intent that you have with this, Senator Pearson, I'm really challenged to feel like it's serving Vermont well.
Chris? Thank you, Brian.
Thank you, Brian. It's you know, the legislative process allows us to test the theory and hear from people impacted, and you've done a good job. I appreciate that. And you know, we have changes that we contemplate in this committee and all across the process that impacts potentially businesses, good and bad, and it's even when we don't agree, it's not a decision people make lightly. You know, you clearly have a good business, you're central to the community, and sounds like you guys work hard. There's also the potential to help spur other businesses. You mentioned the independent repairs are folks are down and you know, have diminished over the years. And I guess I'm sort of hearing you say this is not necessary, this is not wise, and it won't make a big change. And if you do it, it'll hurt my business, and people don't need it. And if you do it, it'll hurt my business. So those can't both be true. If it's not necessary and it's not going to have an impact, what will change? And so help me understand that. I'm very sympathetic to the role you play. I happen to believe that would continue to a large degree, but maybe would give flexibility to consumers in a way that some of them are calling for. So if it's not really going to have impact, what would be the threat to your business? That's I guess what I'd like to help understand.
Sure, absolutely. So I'm looking at it in a couple of avenues. On the repair side, I think it would have zero impact on our business. I think you would find the fact that we do not even sell the repair manual. I don't see anybody within Vermont, and certainly the two individuals who testified yesterday are not going to be, their ability to repair their equipment is not enhanced by the access to the next level tool when they haven't bought the current tool and haven't even started with the repair manual. And so that I don't see the repair side going away. Our customers want a professional technician who's trained on the piece of equipment to do that level of repair. There's many of our customers who will do the routine maintenance, and that's not going to change. This particular piece of legislation, though, allows them to buy parts direct from the manufacturer. They can go online and order them with a lot of the manufacturers now. And they're paying list, and a portion of that goes to the dealer. If the manufacturer, and I just find it hard to believe, and I think that your legislative counsel found it hard to believe that it would ever hold up in court. But if the manufacturer is required to sell to them at the same price that they sell to the dealer, yes, it would have a significant impact. That's kind of the way it says it most. I haven't got the verbiage in front of me, but the way it reads is that the manufacturer would have to sell it to the customer at the same prices that they sell it to the dealer. Well, then you would find that they would start buying direct from the manufacturer for the parts. They're not going to do any more maintenance than they do now. I just don't see that happening. There's not the workforce out there. And because of all of the impediments to being an independent repair, that if you want to be an independent repairman, you can keep yourself plenty busy without having to invest in a couple of expensive tools.
I'm wondering, Brian, you said that that if you sell a piece of equipment to a customer, if they want to buy the tool to analyze if it goes down, how many of your customers, you don't have to give me the exact number, but how many of your customers buy that tool so they can repair their own equipment or check that out? Percentage is fine.
Good question, Senator Starr. Actually, I can't remember a single one of our large farms buying it, but we typically, with municipal, or like the Vermont Guard has sometimes bought the higher level, but they've got some advanced technicians on staff. The state will often, as part of the purchase, get the repair manuals, and so that they can go in and do a lot of their own repairs. And so it's really more the large commercial buyers who have fully outfitted garages. Our farm repair shops, as I was mentioning, they have all that they can do to do routine and mechanical maintenance without getting into hours working on wiring and computers. And so they typically, when I think of our large farms, they're well stocked in their shops. They've got all the filters, barrels of oil, and a lot of the wear parts, but they're not intending or desiring to do the high level maintenance. It just takes too much time, and it precludes them from getting the rest of the stuff done.
We might want to look into what it's costing us an hour to have state employees work on these computerized tractors. That probably, if we did, it would be cheaper to hire you to go fix it. But anyways, they love to buy whatever they can buy. Brian,
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Brian, thank you very much for coming in this morning. You've given me a lot of information I didn't necessarily have before you came in. And I think, the person that suggested that on the manufacturer side, not on the dealer side, but on the manufacturer side, that there might have been an effort for what I call planned obsolescence. I think we all have felt, perhaps, that the personal computer world and the manufacturers have done this, it seems like, time after time after time. Instead of the 1.0, now we have the 2.0 and the 3.0, all of which just cost more money, but doesn't result necessarily in any better performance that I've ever been able to figure out with my own computer. So anyway, that was where I was kind of going with it. But as Chris, and I'm forgetting his name, the other dealer that we had in yesterday, as he pointed out, and you did again today quite well, a lot of this is driven by regulatory situations over which we don't have any control, nor do you, nor, quite frankly, does the manufacturer. They come down from the federal government and have to do more with safety than anything else. And I think that's part of the cost. And I also made a point, I think, yesterday, and I think everybody else on the committee is in agreement. I'm not in a position where I want to burden any further any dealer, because I consider you all to be very local businesses. And I think we owe it to all of our local businesses to support them and find out ways to make life better for them. So I just want to thank you for the testimony. I stayed with it. It was long, but I did stay with every point you made, and I appreciate it. And you've given me some good information. Thank you.
Other questions for Brian?
I don't have a question. I just want to thank him again. I think I feel like we took this up my first term in the House when I was on Commerce with Fred Baser, Brian, and it kind of goes back and forth. But thanks for reminding me of some of the issues.
How do the small tractors, Brian, are they all computerized like the big ones? I know you talked about under a certain horsepower, how many of those that are, that are sold. It sounded like a vast majority are the small. Are they all computerized rigs?
Not to the level that most of them have some version of an onboard control module, and a lot of them can be reset with a very simple tool that is easily, you can buy it for the customer use as well. The biggest thing that's controlling is the emissions, and I think Chris mentioned how many of his calls were were emissions related when he testified yesterday.
Yeah, John,
what I think I understood he was talking about, and that's one of those things that the regulatory environment got ahead of technology a little bit, and it's catching up, and we're figuring it out. And one of the big things is a lot of those smaller tractors, the customers aren't working them hard enough to get them hot enough to burn off cleanly. And so then when we talk about derating, is what he was talking about, it starts to derate because it doesn't want to pollute, and pretty soon it shuts down, and then you have to go in and reset it and make it burn off. And so that's by far the biggest challenge, and it's typically something that we will educate the customer, take care of the first couple at no expense, and educate them. And frankly, all they have to do is, when it gives them that first notification, is they need to keep it running at a high RPM for a period while it burns off. And so,
yeah, the same thing happens on trucks. If you don't let that get hot enough to burn off, you're going to be sitting beside the road. No, it's amazing. But we've got one new truck that just turned 300,000 miles, and that smoke pipe on that truck is as clean as our kitchen table. They certainly run clean, but they're an awful pain in the butt when they go bad. I mean, trip to Burlington automatically. No, and we could buy that computerized, or the tool, as you called it, to do that. But we aren't rigged up to, and trained. And so it's, I think personally, it's cheaper and better to drive it to a technician that has had all that and be back rolling in a few hours, rather than screwing something else up by tinkering on it yourself and being down for 2-3 days.
That's actually a big challenge, Senator Starr, is when people are working on something that they're not fully qualified for, and then they get into a position where it's like, I can't make this work now. And then they bring it into us, and it costs typically significantly more, because we've got to figure out what they've done before we can right the repair. Senator Collmore, if I could just talk to the obsolescence thing, given how small our market is and how good information is on the internet, if some manufacturer was to plan obsolescence, everybody would know about it, and that manufacturer's sales would just plummet. I think we all have experienced that obsolescence of the iPhone or some of the other computer electronics, and it's so aggravating. And I get it, and I totally get what's driving some of the right to repair legislation. But I really feel that as a consolidated group, the major manufacturers and the equipment dealers have tried to address this and come out with the tooling to be fair to all producers and buyers who want to do as much as they possibly can themselves, while also retaining some of that last little bit of the manufacturer's investment into the technologies and R&D to at a level where it won't be pirated. And so it just seems to be a very fair settlement that was done. And I also feel that one of the reasons why PERG is coming after the ag side is because farmers get it. We all love farmers, right? And they work hard. They're just salt of the earth people. And so we have failed to have a national legislative agenda that moved right to repair forward for consumer electronics. And so finding a niche and trying to expand on that niche, it totally makes sense. It's a tactic that they're using. And Vermont being, we're a rural state, and we love our farmers, and frankly, we're known to be a little bit more on the liberal side, and so it's a great place to try to make inroads. But I really feel like it's not going to benefit Vermont.
Chris?
Well, I just want to respond. Nobody from US PERG told me what bill to file. You are seeing in Europe a change specific to ag equipment. I do think that these issues more broadly are somewhat more relevant in rural states where, it can be farther away and harder to access authorized repair. But it's interesting to me, Brian, that you and I are not going to agree on that. I hope that's okay, and I hope we'll have a fair conversation. But your comment about handheld electronics and how it makes sense there, and it is aggravating there. We've pushed that discussion, and those manufacturers come forward and tell us how we just don't understand. They need to recover their costs, their proprietary information. If you replace a battery, literally, I've had this conversation face to face. If you replace a battery in your cell phone, it might explode in your pocket. It never ends, and it's the same theme. And I don't know what the right place to push on is, but I do know that we are losing some control. The chair says he'd rather go to a mechanic that has extensive training, and that's his choice. Some people get their car repaired at the dealer. I never get my car repaired at the dealer. That's my choice. This is a fascinating issue and reflects a modern corporate culture that involves many, many players, and we don't quite know what the impact would be. But there are parallels, and in terms of the ag strategy, you are seeing that change in Europe, and so that's what caught my eye and decided maybe it made sense to have that a more narrow conversation. Though the principles apply if you're talking about the vacuum, your coffee maker, your iPhone, your laptop, or your tractor. It seems to be very similar principles here. But I appreciate your time. You do a good job for our people.
Chris, I don't work on my own cars. I've never owned a car that I had to work on since I was 20 years old.
Well, that reflects well on your pocketbook, Mr. Chair.
I let somebody else have that old car. But anyways, any other questions for committee members? Well, Brian, we certainly appreciate you coming in, and gave us a whole hour or more of your time. Certainly appreciate that. And, you know, if and when we work on this, you know, in the future, Linda will send you an email. And so you're, you know, feel free anytime to, you know, to punch in and be part of our process. We've got to be on the floor in a few minutes, a full Senate floor. So we're going to have to check out here in about 4 minutes. Is there anything else that you'd like to leave us with before we close out?
No, Mr. Chair, I just really appreciate everybody's time. I appreciate the dialogue, and thank you for serving Vermont's ag sector. I really do appreciate that.
Yeah, well, there's never any end to the work that needs to be done to keep it alive and healthy. Before you got on, we were dealing with cannabis and hemp, and how we could mix some hemp and cannabis together and at least sell the damn hemp. And so, you know, there's the milk pricing, as you know, is not very good. And so we've got that to deal with, clean water and trying to get that straightened out. So there's plenty to do. And really, I mean, you said it, but we know it too, is that you aren't going to find a better bunch of people to work with than our farmers. And I think as a committee, we're blessed to be allowed to work with such good people. And so anyways, it's interesting and exciting, and the only way we got to go is up, because you can't get much lower or we'd all be gone. So thanks again, Brian. And you know, if you ever feel like you need to talk with us, you know, just call one of us or call Linda at the office, and we'll certainly work you in.
Okay, I really appreciate it. And if anybody would like to have a just kind of a one-on-one, or if you would as a group, we'd be happy to show you some of the tooling and just go through some of the financials and dynamics at any time. I make that up.
Well, I guess, guys, if anything from any of the committee members.